And welcome to our program, Jones and Company. I'm your host, Christian Jones, and joining us on this special edition of Jones and Company is a special guest, Mr. Drumeco Archer. He is the president of the Bahamas Association of Athletic Associations, or the B3As. Mr. Archer, welcome to Jones and Company.
Thank you, Christian, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And, we talk about athletics in our country a lot, especially it's been a topical issue. We're coming off of the heels of the Carifta Games in Grenada, looking forward to the IAAF World Relays, to Paris Olympics next year, or this year. In terms of the B3As and what it means, what it stands for, what it represents, there may be people in the public who are unaware of what the B3As is. What is the B3As, Mr. Archer?
The B3As can be described as all things in many instances. I suppose the big elephant in the room is that we are the governing body for track and field. Right. And that is every aspect of our sport. Now, oftentimes people confuse us with the Bahamas Olympic Committee. And the distinction there is that track and field, while it is a major stakeholder in the Bahamas Olympic movement, we are not necessarily responsible for all manner of sport. And so the B3As has carried the flag for the Bahamas in so many instances right. by representing the country in track and field. And you've mentioned from the collegiate level to the high school level to the Olympic movement together with the World Athletics. And so we've had a presence at every level.
Right. And what led to your involvement with the B3As?
Well, I was once an athlete. You can never tell, right?
Have you been a lifelong track and field athlete? Or?
I have been a consummate athlete. And by that I mean, when I describe an athlete is just not someone who demonstrates their sporting prowess, but an athlete who takes advantage of the opportunity. They say, whatever God gives you, you let it grow. And I've been the recipient of that. Through high school, I was an athlete, and I represented the Bahamas at the Carifta Games and at the junior CAC level. And then at some point, I had to make a decision that I will translate my body of knowledge in sport to creating a profession out of it. And so I think you asked me off camera, what is your profession? Yeah. And so for many, they might see me as a sports administrator. And so I jokingly say to you that I'm also a part-time lawyer. And I've tried to bring both all of those skill sets to bear to be able to run an organization that is heavy in contractual relationships across many different relationships, including the government and our sponsors and shoe partners and local partners. And so that has reaped good return for us.
You're also somewhat of a diplomat in terms of your position as president of the B3As. As a matter of fact, I heard somebody speaking in terms of different conversations that you may have with the delegation from Trinidad and Tobago, or the delegation from Jamaica, or the delegation from somewhere in the United States.
Well, I never quite saw myself as a diplomat. Right. I think that one, I suppose, can describe it as such. Track and field touches and concerns every manner of exchange. And so, yes, at the very top level of the sport, you have some of the brightest minds who run their organizations. And so, yes, you talk with kings and you talk with the common people. And so I think that at every level, you are providing representation. And so if that's what a diplomat is, that's what it is.
Right, I meant more so in terms of, you go to these different countries that host events and you speak to sporting officials there representing that host country as well as other countries. And, there are different, I guess, associations, athletic associations, regionally and internationally, that I would assume that the B3As has different relationships with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Our sport is a fascinating sport. And as I'd mentioned before, Lord Sebastian Coe, who is our president, right. He was once a part of the British Parliament. Right. And so we talk with people at every level with governmental influences. but also human influences within their own common parlance or their own local environments. And that is what makes track and field so interesting, because it gives one the opportunity to really explore the world or experience the world geopolitically, as well as through sport.
Right.
And this is what I've encouraged young athletes to take advantage of. Everyone will not be a Shawnee Miller-Weebo or a Stephen Gardner or a Devin Charlton or an Anthony Strawn, and then you go on to many other names like the Pauline Davis and the Frank Rutherfords. And please forgive me if I don't name them all, but I think you get the point. But what can be said is that those who were not successful have turned out to be wonderful community leaders. Ramon Miller is on the police force, and he's doing a wonderful job. He's returned back to the sport, and he's carrying his water bottle or water bucket. And so there are so many wonderful stories from becoming doctors and lawyers and engineers and people who really are a part of the development of this country.
Right. And you said something, you mentioned something about opportunity a moment ago, and to put a finer point on that, do you find that especially taking your career, putting your career into focus, your years or decades now of involvement in track and field, have you seen that opportunities for athletes within the sport has grown?
Well, I use me as a good example. I grew up through DeVoe Street. I came from a mixed family background. I grew up through the streets of Chippingham. And so what I say is, if it had not been for track and field, I would not have gotten an education. I got a degree in economics from the University of Central Florida, and then went on to UWI and read law.
Yeah.
And it could only have been by God and by the endowment of what he'd given me as an athlete to be able to at least touch the surface of the sport. But beyond the sport, it gave me the opportunity to be a professional.
Right. In terms of the athletic programs that we have here in country, and if you compare them regionally and internationally, we hear stories about the long distance runners from Kenya and what goes into their training. We hear stories about Usain Bolt running barefoot through the mountains of Jamaica in terms of his training. In terms of the facilities that we have here in country, in terms of the programs that we have for athletes to be able to enrich or to be able to sharpen their skills, develop their skills more, become faster, are we doing a good job in terms of supporting athletes on that end?
I think we need to bring it into focus. The perspective is that we are an archipelago. There are islands that's strewn about the place. Transportation to the islands are very difficult, and resources are even more difficult to find. Track and field is a specialized area, and although there are some fundamentals of running, jumping, and throwing, the human resource, the human capital is also very lacking. And then, of course, let's not talk about facilities. What I would say is that it has been the ambition of this government to ensure that we continue to build out facilities. And I know that there's been a wonderful project going on in Cat Island, and there's a wonderful facility in Grand Bahama. In fact, Grand Bahama has hosted several international events, international track and field competitions. And it is my wish one day that perhaps we can have one in Anagua. But there is a process, and I think that it requires the buy-in, not only of the government, not only of our sport, but also of the communities that represent the people of this country.
Yeah.
And I know that each time we go and have clinics in Anagua, Morton Salt has always been a wonderful corporate partner. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of that throughout the Family Islands. It is really the only way that we can continue to grow our sport, not just by identifying talent, but also providing resources as well.
So how do we get, for example, a Stephen Gardner from Moores Island, Abaco, that has the ability or the training that he has, despite the fact that Moores Island, maybe perhaps even the population of Moores Island, Abaco, may not justify putting the type of investment in terms of facilities there?
You know, we came back from the Carifta Games, I think a week and a half ago, and we had a post-mortem about our performance on Thursday of this week. What came out of that discussion was that the Bahamas achieved more gold medals at these games than we did from the games that we hosted here in Nassau last year. But what was also true is that we didn't do so well on the track side. We were wonderful, masterful in the field areas, and field by that I mean throwing and jumping events. But what comes to a head is that we have not taken a scientific approach about how we identify talent. And it really has everything to do with physicality. Keyshawn Strawn was I think, triple gold medalist at the Carifta Games, followed by his sister, Kamira Strawn. Well, they dominated the Carifta circuit, but it goes back to the physicality and the genetics of what we find across the various islands. So, Andros, you're burly and strong and tall and big, and that manifests itself in the throwing event. But of course, you can look at people who've hailed from various islands and see very distinct genetic makeup. They say the Long Islanders chase sheep, and so they're good distance runners. But I think it's more than that. Long Islanders are prolific swimmers, and so we have people from Long Island who've done very well in swimming. But swimming also translates into good middle distance runners, and so I think. To say all of that would turn us to the point, and that is perhaps a genetic study should be had to determine where and the physical structure and the physicality of our local athletes and just how we capitalize on that.
Right. Can we identify an island as having perhaps the fastest runners?
Well, I think that they all do. You know, David Charlton is from Mayaguana. He's produced some great athletes. His two children, Devin Charlton and Anthea Charlton. I think Anthea just jumped a personal best in the long jump this weekend. And Devin Charlton is the world record holder.
Right.
All right. Shawnee Miller, Rebo. I'm not sure what island the Millers are from. But if you look at the Millers, they're all statuesque and strong and lean. Right. Leslie Miller being a product of the Millers' physical and athletic prowess, right. Would suggest that this is all genetic in makeup.
Right. And I'm not sure if Mr. Miller, that's Leslie Miller, I'm not sure if he still holds a record, but I think at some point he did hold a record in Florida for, I think, the 200 meter, 400 meter, one of those events. But he does have a decorated background in terms of track and field. And I guess it does, as you say, I think that's absolutely correct in terms of not only physicality, but also different geographical strengths when we look at sporting. When we look at, and it's interesting that you mentioned or compare the Carifta Games last year that we hosted here in the Bahamas with the Carifta Games this year, and we find that we received less medals last year than this year.
No, we received less medals this year in total.
In total.
But we received more gold medals this year than last year.
Right. And what do you think, what would be the reason or the cause of that?
Well, you know, there are always going to be ebbs and flows, ups and downs in our sport. I think that Jamaica has a dominant women's track and field program. In the past, they used to have a dominant track and field track program under the leadership of Usain Bolt. Right. And so for us, I think that it's really about looking at what we have in our pipeline, looking at our development program. I think that what has been good for our country is that, and even World Athletics attests to it, that we have perhaps the most robust kids athletics program. So we have a feeder system that makes our program perhaps one of the most sustainable programs in the world. And it's by no stretch of the imagination, it's because of the focus that we've given to our developmental program. The kids athletics program, I think, should be credited to the likes of Sherry Francis and the Dexter Bodis, who've done an amazing job. I know that Star Trackers used to have a very strong program, and now the baton has been moved over to Red Line. And so I'm going through some of the clubs who've made an incredible contribution to ensuring that we continue to replenish. And that's a fascinating opportunity for the country. And I think Bahama Speed Dynamics has also been a major contributor to programs such as that for the kids' athletics area.
Right. Has there been any way, or have you in any way tried to, perhaps in terms of your leadership of the B3As, tried to perhaps emulate perhaps different approaches that your predecessors had that perhaps were proven to be successful, or have you to a certain extent tried to do things a bit differently? I know in terms of, I think of the presidents of the B3As, I think Mike Sands was president at one point. You have Winston Gus Cooper, president, or originally coming out of St. George's Athletic Club, starting Pioneers Athletic Club.
You know your history.
Yeah, a little bit. You know, the Valley boy too, so yes, I got to know these things.
Well, I like you already.
Right.
Well, I'll say this. I have drawn from the leadership of all who have come before me. Mike Sands has been a tremendous leader. I think that he's one of the most widely respected athletes of our time, and also one of the most widely respected administrators of our time. Right. I have come into this administration with a different type of mandate. I think that there's always been one school of thought that says that the Carifta Games is a developmental event, and so we should impose less stringent performance requirements for the purposes of selecting teams. Well, I say that it's not a developmental meet. It is perhaps one of the most competitive meets in the world. Developmental meets would really be club meets and high school meets. And so taking that approach, I've made it very clear that we have to change our standards. And there has been a lot of hemming and hawing and pushing about that. But at the end of the day, the parents don't run the organization, and the general public don't run the organization, although they expect for the Bahamas to do well. And the only way we can continue to do well is if we impose standards that are competitive and that can rival the world.
Right. In terms of the reintroduction now of the IAAF,
World Athletics.
Right, the World Relay event being held here in New Providence. What is your position or your opinion on that? There are those that believe it's something that is helpful not only to sports in the Bahamas, but also to the economy. You had the former Christie administration that would have negotiated and organized to host it here, and then eventually there was, I believe, even agreement between the government of the Bahamas at the time and the world, or the IAAF, to make the Bahamas somewhat of the headquarters for the IAAF World Relay event. And then coming to power, the Free National Movement decided to move in somewhat of a different direction, not seeing, I believe, or not recognizing the benefits of that event held here in New Providence. But in terms of it returning to the Bahamas, what is your opinion on that?
Boy, that's a big question, a very loaded question. So let me just start by saying the World Relays has been morphed into what was once called the IAAF World Relays to now World Athletics Relays. Okay. They've gone through a name change. And so I think the household name, even still in the Bahamas, is IAAF. And forgive me for correcting you. I think it's a common
thank you for correcting me.
It is World Athletics now.
Okay.
And so my perspective is that this is a world-class event. It falls under what World Athletics refers to as the World Athletic Series. And so it's a part of the World Championships in as much as it's now the World Relays. And I think that it gives the Bahamas exponential exposure. What is important, though, is that there should be a distinction between the contribution, the financial contribution to the event, and the intangible return that the country receives from hosting the event. World Athletics is comprised of, I think, 204 countries. of which many countries participate. But not only do they participate, they're all watching, and they're all watching the brand of the Bahamas.
Right.
I believe that it is important for the country to take advantage of the opportunity to have so many eyeballs on your country all at one time. And so the Progressive Liberal Party is a party that, in my estimation, is a party that's really sports driven, and the philosophy or the ideology behind that is that it somehow creates the opportunity for people from poorer backgrounds, which levels the playing field, giving one the opportunity to go off to university and to experience the world in a way that perhaps only wealthier individuals might have the opportunity to do. And so that is a philosophical community kind of approach. Well, the F&M says, well, we're spending X amount of money and we don't see the financial return of this event, and so therefore it's not a viable product. Well, It really depends on what you think to be viable. If the Ministry of Tourism takes on an aggressive campaign to say that one of the greatest track and field events is taking place in this country, and here it is, we have an opportunity for this now to be a qualifying event for the Olympic Games, where of the 16 relay spots, 14 will be identified in this country, and to say, come to the Bahamas, or the Bahamas hosts the greatest events on the planet. I think that that's a kind of tourism product that would better any ad that you'd have at the Super Bowl game. That's just my view. And maybe that's a plug for track and field. But no different for any sporting endeavor, because I think that in so many ways the Bahamas has an opportunity because of its idyllic location and just the allure of being in the Bahamas. For whatever the reason is, the world sees this place as something very special. And if you know me, when I travel the world in track and field, I don't really sit in VIP areas. I'm right at trackside. And in fact, I was almost escorted from the Grenadian police officers to say that I had no business there. And I told them that change my accreditation from a VVIP accreditation to a media accreditation, because that's really where I want to be. Right. But in those discussions with media houses from across the Caribbean, the comment was, no one does it better than in the Bahamas.
Really?
Powerful. Powerful story to tell. And that's not from a Bahamian. It's from people who are from every part of the Caribbean telling our story. And so coming back to your point, I think that if we tell our story more effectively through sports as a parallel to entertainment, and if we understand that sport and entertainment is perhaps the largest industry or the largest business in the world, right, then I think that we're onto something special.
Right. But we have to be willing to, I believe, especially if we look at the future, and people talk about, or we talk about the title of Sir Clement Maynard's book, Putting on More Speed, in terms of our national development.
Yeah, but I like that the naming of the book.
Right. In terms of our national development, especially if we look at it through sports and entertainment, the development can't be haphazard. We can't necessarily wait for, if we want more facilities in different islands, if we want facilities in Anagua, we're going to wait for the Chinese to come back and build a stadium there as well. But there has to be some sort of, I believe, vision. There has to be some manifestation of different policies put in place, different efforts, different resources allocated, and some will argue, well, the resources part is a problem. But, we got a stadium in 2014, National Stadium that we have here right down the road, the Thomas Robinson National Stadium. And 10 years after, it was put there, it's fallen into slightly a state of disrepair, that now we have, thankfully, the Chinese government assisting in those repairs at no cost to us. But do you believe that we ought to have been able to maintain that stadium ourselves, Mr. Archer?
Well, Kristen, yes and no. When we came to the first edition of the World Relays, we simply had no understanding what it was to put on a world-class event.
Right.
All right? Today, I believe that we can go into the room with the best of them in the world and to say, this is what we want to see, and this is why.
Right.
This is what we want the world to see when you come to the Bahamas, and this is why. Because it is a product that if it's going to be held here in the Bahamas, it's a product that's unique to us. I say the very same thing with facility development. The Chinese built a facility that was what we thought was state-of-the-art. We are very grateful to the Chinese for it. Yes, maintenance becomes an issue. I think if I give you a house in 10 years, you do nothing with it or do very little to it, then you expect for it to fall into decay. Well, I think that as we grow and we see the demands for the use of the facility, the possibility of hosting other events beyond track and field, but concerts and
Right.
soccer events and many other types of events that could be staged there in that stadium,
Right.
we see the need for maintenance and upkeep and expansion. And so we now can say that the NSA, the National Sports Authority, the Ministry of Works, has come closer to keeping in step with what state-of-the-art construction looks like in the sporting environment. And I think that we're better placed now to make some decisions that we never considered 10 years ago.
Right. Well, Mr. Archer, at this point, I want to take our first break on our program. And when we come back, we can dive a little deeper for the remainder of our program into personally, who is Drumeco Archer, and perhaps even your plans in the future for what you're going to do with the B3A. So we'll take this first break on our program, Issues of Jones and Company, and we'll be right back.